I'm glad to clear up that mystery about Ruslan being Armenian. I kept hearing over the years, Ruslan's Armenian. I was like, no, every Armenian I've ever met is bald with a big beard. But now they explain it. He's half. So. We know which side you got the hair from. All right. One quick question though, because I was way in the back. Did he actually say in this church, spooning leads to forking? You guys let that slide? We have Mike Winger here. Mike Winger, I look forward to your 27-part series exposing Ruslan. I'm kidding. There's no way I would ever look forward to anything put out by that. But it is good to see you young and up-and-coming YouTubers needing tips afterwards. Let me know. Okay, so we're going to talk about engaging unbelievers boldly, and that Mike, I'm going to have to kind of stay over here because we're going to read some passages. We're going to be doing some reading here. But as far as engaging unbelievers boldly, you might have a mental image of some guy standing on the corner with a sign that says, turn or burn sinner, and preaching. I used to live in New York, so every time I would ride the train, there'd be someone on the train preaching the gospel. And so that comes to people's mind when they're thinking of boldness, but not the most important part of preaching boldly, as far as I can tell. So what I want to focus on pretty much the entire time, and then we'll bring it back down at the end, but I want to focus on what I think is the most important part in engaging unbelievers boldly. So we're going to check out some passages here. We have, remember this one? Woman at the well. We're not going to read the entire thing, assuming people have a general idea of the woman at the well. So they're going through Samaria. They stop outside a little town. There's a well there. The disciples go into the town to get some food, and Jesus stays at the well. Woman shows up. And it's been pointed out by people that she's not showing up with the other women when they come out to draw water. So looks like she's some sort of social outcast. And you kind of find out why as Jesus starts telling her everything she ever did. But the woman goes back into the town, starts telling people, you need to come listen to this guy. When Jesus' followers come back, and then we read this little part. Jesus talking to his followers. Don't you have a saying, it's still 4 months until the harvest? I tell you, open your eyes and look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. And this is as people are walking out. As people are coming out of the town to come see Jesus, he's saying, look at the fields. They are ripe for harvest. Even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps, is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work, and you have reaped the benefits of their labor. There's two things I want to point out here. One, I've always thought it was interesting, like you had the apostles go into this town. They don't bring anybody out. And one woman goes in there who brings all the people out. This woman. And so that's interesting. The apostles go in there like, hey, where's McDonald's? Meanwhile, the woman goes in there and brings the town with her. The other thing is something that Greg Kokel often points out about this passage, which I think is massively underrated. I would encourage everyone to read Greg's book, Tactics, and the follow-up. What's the follow-up? Street Smarts. Awesome. He takes the principles that he lays down in Tactics, but then uses them in various situations that are going to arise for you. So both of those, awesome books. But Greg points out in this passage that you have the apostles, and they're ready to preach the gospel. Everyone's coming out to hear about Jesus. But Jesus points out that other people came before you, and they were doing a lot of the work. They were doing a lot of the work before you. So, like most obviously, the woman just did some work. The woman brought these guys out so they can hear the word of God. So even now, the one who reaps draws a wage and harvests a crop for eternal life, so that the sower and the reaper may be glad together. Thus the saying, one sows and another reaps is true. I sent you to reap what you have not worked for. Others have done the hard work. So kind of pointing out that it was actually the harder work. And that's interesting. What's the harder work that came before the preaching? Well, it's whatever came before this that made these people such that when they hear the Messiah's there, they want to go meet the Messiah. So that's the work that comes along beforehand. So who's involved in that work? Well, you can think back, prophets way back in the day. I have to point out, most of the work over the centuries would have just been done by parents. Parents telling their kids about God and about the Messiah and so on. They were doing most of the work. Prophet gets up and preaches a couple minutes here or there. Parents, they're doing that their entire lives with their kids. And it's generation after generation after generation after generation. So anyway, I find this passage fascinating about that idea that you have someone doing the preaching, but the work that came before that, really, 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 really important. That's why it's awesome, Greg pointing that out. And it's something that we've kind of lost sight of, especially in America. Some of you are old enough to remember Billy Graham crusades back in the day? You had Billy Graham show up to an area, pack out an entire football stadium. Tens of thousands of people. He'd get up, he'd preach a simple gospel message, 10 minutes, and thousands of people would come down. Thousands of people would come forward to accept Christ. But if you ask most of those people, if you went to most of those people beforehand, like the 1960s or something like that, you went to most of the people in that stadium beforehand. Hey, you believe in God? Yeah, of course I believe in God. You believe in the Bible? Yeah, of course I believe in the Bible. You believe in Jesus? Of course I believe in Jesus. Okay, what's the problem? They just never made any sort of commitment. And so what do you need for someone like that? A simple gospel message, make sure they understand the gospel. And then what are you waiting for? We kind of live in a different world right now. Right? Back then, again, you ask someone, do you believe in God? Yes. You believe in the Bible? Yes. If you ask people today, you're going to get a lot of different answers. And it seems that a lot of people have gotten their minds around the idea that what Billy Graham was doing, that's how you do evangelism. Look at the massive success of these thousands and thousands of people coming forward. Well, doesn't work as well with, let's say, a Muslim or something like that, or one of the new atheists. You just get up and preach a 8 to 10 minute message, and then they're ready to accept Christ. Why? They have all sorts of objections and so on, and they believe they already know things that are true, and it doesn't line up with Christianity. And so, guess what? Seems that work of, if you want to describe it in terms with parables and so on, like preparing the soil so that the seed isn't just falling on rocks, seems to be a massively important part of evangelism. So keep that thought that when you're preaching the gospel or sharing the gospel or something like that, there's stuff that was happening before that, long before that. So, I want to check out Acts 2. I love this passage for some reason. You'll see why, because it's awesome. Check this out. So Acts 2, 1 through 4. When the day of Pentecost came, so this is Pentecost, they were all together in one place. Suddenly a sound like the blowing of a violent wind came from heaven, and they filled the whole house where they were sitting. They saw what seemed to be tongues of fire that separated and came to rest on each of them. All of them were filled with the Holy Spirit and began to speak in other tongues as the Spirit enabled them. All right, that's pretty familiar. Next verse, now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Why were there staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven? When the day of Pentecost, it's Pentecost. Remember Pentecost? So you had Pentecost, it's Pentecost, and then you have, now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. Why were there Jews from every nation under heaven? Because it was Pentecost. And you have, in the Old Testament, you have multiple passages along these lines. Here's a short one. Deuteronomy 16, 3 times a year. It's a command from God. 3 times a year, all your men must appear before the Lord your God at the place he will choose. At the festival of unleavened bread, the festival of weeks, and the festival of tabernacles. No one should appear before the Lord empty-handed. Each of you must bring a gift in proportion to the way the Lord your God has blessed you. So Festival of Unleavened Bread, Festival of Weeks, that's Pentecost, and Festival of Tabernacles. So you've got the Passover festival. If you're a Jew and you can make it to Jerusalem for the Passover, you're supposed to do that. Same thing with Pentecost. Supposed to go up if you can. Now, that would have been somewhat more difficult for lots of Jews because after God gave them this command, the Jews are repeatedly conquered. They're repeatedly exiled. They would be exiled to various places and so on. In other words, if one kingdom can come in and just conquer you and then demand tribute or something like that, if you really, really, really annoyed them and they saw that you're like this ongoing problem that they just want to do away with, they just start breaking up your population and take you to different parts of the empire. And so you kind of lose your national identity. But also in the Old Testament, God gave a variety of laws which kind of kept the Jews being their own people. You know, if you look at the nations that were around Israel back then, you know, the Ammonites and the Moabites, where are they? Where'd these groups go? Well, they kind of were incorporated into other groups. In other words, if they were deported for some reason, they just lose their national identity. They'd end up mixing with the people around them and stuff, and then they kind of lose their identity as Moabites or as Ammonites. The Jews would sometimes do that as well, but you would always have some faithful Jews who say, nope, we're sticking to our laws, we're sticking to our customs, and they wouldn't mix with the people that surrounded them. And you end up with Jewish communities scattered all over the place, all across the known world. So let's go back to this. Now there were staying in Jerusalem God-fearing Jews from every nation under heaven. God-fearing. Why? They still paid enough attention to God to say, you know what? It's Pentecost. We're commanded to go there, so I'm leaving and I'm going and staying in Jerusalem for Pentecost. When they heard the sound, a crowd came together in bewilderment because each one heard their own language being spoken. Utterly amazed, they asked, aren't all these who are speaking Galileans? Then how is it that each of us hears them in our native language? Parthians, Medes, and Elamites, residents of Mesopotamia, Judea and Cappadocia, Pontus and Asia, Phrygia and Pamphylia, Egypt and the parts of Libya near Cyrene, visitors from Rome, both Jews and converts to Judaism, Cretans and Arabs, we hear them declaring the wonders of God in our own tongues. Amazed and perplexed, they asked one another, what does this mean? So look at all these different places. And if you look at a map, it kind of looks like this, right? So you got Jerusalem, here's where everyone else is from. See all these other places? You had Jewish communities in all these other places, and the faithful among them, if they could go up for the Passover or for Pentecost, they'd do it. Now, what big thing happened right before this? At the Passover, the Festival of Unleavened Bread. Yeah, crucifixion, Jesus crucified around the time of Passover. By the way, just think of the meanings of these feasts, right? Like the Passover is dedicated to the Passover in Egypt and God rescuing his people from captivity and so on. Lots of these same people would have been in Jerusalem during the Passover, during the Feast of Unleavened Bread, when Jesus is crucified. Then maybe you start even hearing rumors that his followers are preaching that he rose from the dead and appeared to them. And then a little later, you go back for Pentecost, and then you see what just happened in the book of Acts. And it's interesting, the Pentecost, that was the wheat harvest. That was celebrating the wheat harvest. Just look at what's going on right here in the story, the wheat harvest. They're celebrating the wheat harvest, and then here comes the harvest. So you see all these places would come to Jerusalem. Jews from all these places would come to Jerusalem when they could. And so anyway, just start doing the math here of what was involved in this process. One, you had the commands for Jews to go to Jerusalem for these festivals. You have the law, the Old Testament law, which always kept the Jews a separate people. Again, not all Jews followed it, but you would always end up with a Jewish community. And then, because you have this lasting Jewish community, you have Jewish communities all over the place because they're repeatedly conquered and many of them exiled, and you end up with Jewish communities around the known world. They come up to Jerusalem for Pentecost. And what happens? Acts 2, 41 to 45. Those who accepted his message, so Peter preaches a sermon. Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. People who came from all these different countries. There would have been some who were local and so on, but the emphasis there is on these people who spoke all these different languages because they're from all these different places. And what happens after they hear Peter's sermon? Those who accepted his message were baptized, and about 3,000 were added to their number that day. What do? They go back home. They go back home to Arabia and so on. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and to fellowship, to the breaking of bread and to prayer. They stayed. They stayed to learn from the apostles. And that's why you end up with this follow-up here. Everyone was filled with awe at the many wonders and signs performed by the apostles. All the believers were together and had everything in common. They sold property and possessions to give to anyone who had need. Remember these stories in Acts? You have someone like Barnabas and so on. He's selling his property to provide for the community. Why? There was a bunch of people there who were a long way from home. They lived in a completely different part of the world. They came there expecting to celebrate a feast, and they said, we cannot leave this place. We cannot leave this place. So you have people from across the known world seated at the feet of the apostles, learning about Jesus from the people who knew him. And they're staying there for a while, and Christians who had property sell it. We have to support this. We have to support this community. And so you end up with a bunch of Christians in the Jerusalem church for a while. Then eventually you get to the stoning of Stephen. Stephen, first martyr. What happens right after his martyrdom? On that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem. And all except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. Godly men buried Stephen and mourned deeply for him, but Saul began to destroy the church. Going from house to house, he dragged off both men and women and put them in prison. Those who had been scattered preached the word wherever they went. So you have a Jerusalem church. You have people from all over the known world. They go to Jerusalem. They hear Peter's sermon. They become Christians. They decide to stay with the apostles. Christians start selling property to support these people as they learn about Christianity. Then a persecution breaks out. Now we know how to get these Christians. We'll crush them. What happens? All these people are scattered. And so it says, on that day, a great persecution broke out against the church in Jerusalem, all except the apostles. So everyone, thousands of people. All except the apostles were scattered throughout Judea and Samaria. So persecution breaks out, everyone flees. Well, guess what? Some of these people would have went home. Right? Some of these people wouldn't have stayed in Judea and Samaria. They would have gone home. They would have gone home to where they're from. And so you end up with this, but in reverse. I could probably make the graphic and have the arrows pointing outwards, right? So they all come in, they stay there, they learn about Jesus from the people who knew him best. Hey, let's stop these guys. We'll persecute them. They scatter, a bunch of them go back to their homes, and now in all these places across the known world, you have people preaching the gospel who learned Christianity from the feet of Jesus' own apostles. Why I find all this interesting is the early church, the Jewish leaders, not big fans, had a big problem with it. They want to wipe this out. Eventually, the Roman Empire wants to wipe this out. The Roman Empire. So on one hand, you have this little group of Jesus followers, and on the other hand, you have the most powerful empire the world had ever seen. What kind of chance do these guys stand? None. Most powerful empire the world had ever seen. And you look at why the Roman Empire was never able to stop it, and what's the reason? What's the reason the Romans, the Jewish leaders, why couldn't anyone stop these guys. Well, look at how it spread. Look at how it spread. And so that's what I'm talking about with Jesus saying, hey, people came along and did work way before you. Long before what happened here. Just put it all together now. I've already said it, but put it all together. Old Testament commands go up to Jerusalem for these 3 festivals. You have the law, which keeps them separate people. So even after they get repeatedly conquered, they end up with Jewish communities in various cities. The faithful among them would still honor the command to go up for these festivals. They go up to one festival, Passover and unleavened bread. That's where Jesus is crucified. And then they show up for Pentecost, and that's when they see divine signs. They listen to Peter's message. They convert. They stay there. They stay there for a couple of years. Persecution breaks out. All these people go to their homes across the world. Guess what? Roman Empire cannot stop that. Cannot stop that. And so these are the kinds of things that I'm thinking about when I'm thinking about engaging unbelievers boldly. What do I mean here? It's like we're part of something that is way bigger. And God is in control, and God knows what he's doing the entire time. So when you're walking into a situation, it shouldn't be, hey, here's me, and here's this person that I am tasked with, or something like this. You're part of something that's been going on for thousands of years. You're part of this. You're part of this. And so kind of bringing this up to our time, I'm sure lots of you can look back at your life and say, wow, this doesn't look like coincidence. This happened, and this happened, and this happened. Me becoming a Christian, I saw this just looking right after I became a Christian, I was looking back at this going, wow, if I hadn't ended up in that block of the jail at that time, and then this happened in there, and then it spreads, they break people up, and I end up over here, and then I'm in this dorm with this Christian who turned himself in for 21 felonies, and then he ticks me off so bad that we end up in a fasting battle, and then they think I'm trying to starve myself to death, so they stick me in this cell, and all I have are these Bible studies and so on that I'm going to go through, and if I hadn't read this book at this time, and that book at that time, and this thing at this time, and so on, if all this hadn't come together in just this way, it didn't seem like it would hold together. And even after that, I got out of jail, I went straight to college, and I go in there, and I just needed a 5th class, and I was trying to get my schedule to where all my classes were at a certain time, so I didn't have to go back and forth as much. So I realized I needed an 8 a.m. class, and okay, Communications 101 is a requirement. Let me pick one of them. There are dozens, so I picked one, go into that class, and that's the professor who runs the speech and debate team. And after we started giving speeches, she said, hey, David, you might like this. You might want to do some of this. I go in there where I meet Nabil Qureshi, who also joined the team because he wanted to be the ultimate speaker for Islam on the planet. So he's actually was a communications major, wanted to learn, wanted as much experience as possible. And then we go on a trip together. Why do we end up sticking together? Well, because everyone else on the team, they would always want to go out clubbing and so on when we were competing. And we weren't interested, so we'd always end up together and having these discussions and so on. So I just look back at them, it's like, gosh, every step of the way, it all fits together. Now, so, looking around at the world today, heard some talk of revival here. Heard a little talk of revival. Don't want to get too cocky about the revival and so on, but I'm just looking at the stuff that's going on. I was like, you have all the ingredients here for a huge revival. They're all there. We still have to do what we're supposed to do, but my goodness, look at what's going on around us. So you take something like the new atheism. Remember when the new atheism came along? The new atheism came along, and what was the message? It's, hey, if millions of people just abandon religion, abandon Christianity, become atheists, the world will become better in every way. Will become more scientific, will become more rational, and so on. They said that 25 years ago. A bunch of people believed it. Hey, let's do this. Yeah, millions of people become atheists, and the world will become more scientific and more rational. How'd that work out for anyone? Have you seen any indication? Because guess what? Millions of people did become atheists and start going to these reason rallies and this and that. And have you seen any way that the world became more rational, more scientific? I don't know. Kind of looks like people started becoming atheists and the entire world went insane. That's what it looks like. But guess what? People have caught on to that, right? Even if they can't put their finger on this. And I've seen lots of atheists saying it. Ayaan Hirsi Ali said it right to Dawkins. She said, none of your predictions came true. Everything you predicted, none of it happened. And so people have kind of lost confidence that the new atheists are able to deliver on their promises. And so have you noticed they're just not as aggressive as they were 15, 20 years ago? Why? People are catching on. It doesn't work. Look at Islam. Look at Islam. You've got, some of you are too young to remember, but if you go back 2007, 2008, they were telling us it's done. Islam is the world's fastest growing religion. There's nothing you can do to stop it. It's just math. This was the data that came out. They have the highest birth rates in Asia. Muslims have the highest birth rates in Africa. Muslims have the highest birth rates in Europe. It's just math. If you take a group, even if they're smaller, if they have birth rates that are 3 times higher than the regular population, it's a matter of time. So we're sitting here, by 2050, this major European city is going to become this, and by this, Germany is going to become a Muslim majority country, and so on. And then we end up with like the avalanche of apostasy and so on. So the apostasy rate basically goes from around 0% among young Muslims to 26% in about 15 or 20 years. So you start having that, but the numbers are still heavily favoring Islam as far as like the birth rates, just constantly cranking out babies. Well, you look at that and you go, we're doomed. If you're looking at this as a Christian who thinks God is in control, look at what we have all of a sudden. We're told 15, 20 years ago, it's just math. No way you win this one. No way. And you have plenty of Christians who are like, well, the Bible says we're ultimately going to be persecuted and so on. Hey, guess what? I don't know if that's 10,000 years from now. So I'm not just going to, I guess we'll just sit back and do nothing here. But right before, we're just decades away from it being too late. And all of a sudden, what do we get? We get everything we could possibly need to deal with this. One, we get open access to Muslims around the world. You go back for 14 centuries, Muslim leaders have been able to keep their people isolated, insulated from hearing any critique of what they're saying and from hearing any serious presentation of an alternative. All of a sudden, we have open access to Muslims in Pakistan. You, right now, could go on Facebook, on your phone, and talk to a Muslim in Pakistan. 14 centuries of Christians couldn't have dreamed of these opportunities. So you've got that. You now have access to people who, for 14 centuries, you had no access to. And not only that, you get all their sources. If you had access to Muslims a century ago, how are you going to respond to anything they're saying? You don't know what's in their books. You can't read their books. Their books haven't even been translated. Now, all of a sudden, you have open access to all of their sources to be able to refute any lie that they're telling. You've been given every single thing you could possibly need. So if you're looking at this from a Christian perspective, what have we got to worry about? I'm looking at this and I'm going, you're thumping your chest, we're conquering the world. I'm looking at this going, the Lord has delivered you into our hands.
That's good.
We'll just go through this really quickly. Just wanted some little signs here. So check this out. There was a study in the UK. Now what I thought, and what the researchers thought, was that the oldest generation would be the most Christian, because they still remembered Christianity, and the youngest generation would be the most atheistic. The idea was that the UK is becoming progressively more atheistic. Their study showed the exact opposite. Look at that. Atheists, so people who identify as atheist, the smallest percentage is the youngest generation. It's the oldest people who are most atheistic. And so you look there, it's the old people who are atheistic. The younger people, they're in a completely different boat. Look at this. Willingness to listen to arguments in favor of religion. The highest percentage is among young people. The highest percentage. Young people in the UK are significantly more open to hearing what you have to say about the gospel than the older generation. Interesting stuff. Look at, here we have in the US, some of you may have seen this, decline of Christianity in the US has slowed, may have leveled off. Why is that? Well, here you have basically what we're familiar with for many years. People who identify as Christian decreasing. But then you get this little bit right here where it starts going back up. Now, I don't want to say, you see, Christianity's taking over the world or something like that. I'm saying this all kind of fits together. This all kind of fits together. And you can go all the way back Old Testament. People turned away from God. What happened? God let other nations just come in and wreak havoc on them. And you get Western nations turning away from God. What happens? There's all sorts of bad things start happening. People catch on. People eventually catch on. So if you're looking at this, you're seeing the main alternatives that people are considering, that people were focusing on. One's just the new atheism just collapsing, couldn't deliver on any of its promises. So if you were at all scientific, my atheist friend, if you're at all scientifically minded, you have to look at the evidence completely refuting everything you've ever said, and you have to abandon these silly claims. And Islam, apostasy rate, again, gone from around 0% among young Muslims to 26%. And it hasn't been a lot of people going after Islam. People are actually catching on. My goodness, we're talking about a completely different world here. So just wanted to, one last passage here, Book of Acts. I don't know why, this has always cracked me up. So this is after Jesus' ascension. Jesus ascends in front of his disciples. It says, they were looking intently up into the sky as he was going, when suddenly 2 men dressed in white stood beside them. Men of Galilee, they said, why do you stand here looking into the sky? This same Jesus who has been taken from you into heaven will come back in the same way you have seen him go into heaven. The words cracked me up. I was like, what are you guys looking at? What do you, keep in mind, this would have been shortly after the Great Commission. Go into all the world, make disciples of all nations, baptizing them in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. These guys are sitting around, oh, look at that's where Jesus went. And then they get an angel, hey, what are you guys doing? Don't you have something to do? Do you not have something to do here? Why are you staring into the sky? And I'm saying this because when you, as soon as you start talking, I'm talking from experience, as soon as you start thinking in terms of revival, you're looking around at the signs. The exact same way, if you were paying attention around the time of Pentecost, thinking, a lot of things seem like they're lining up here for this awesome sermon and these conversions. I'm looking around going, it seems like things are just lining up, like everything we could possibly need to reach people around the world with the gospel. It's all right here. It's all right here. So as far as takeaways, one, don't stand around staring up at the sky watching TikTok videos going, when's the end coming? You're told, not for you to know. Not for you to know. You've got a job to do. God told you what's going to happen, and he told you what your job is until it happens. So you've got a job to do. So that's one. Two, you're not alone here. None of it, we're not alone. You may feel like you're alone. You have one friend that you're talking to and so on. You're not. And I don't just mean that you have a bunch of your fellow Christians around you. I'm talking about all of history. It's all been leading up. When you walk in to a discussion with your friend, your mindset should be, I am a servant of the Almighty who's been sent to deliver the gospel to you as part of his plan, which reaches back thousands of years for reaching people with the gospel. That should be pretty emboldening, I would think. Right? If you know your purpose and you know you have God on your side, what do you have to be worried about? And so you can be bold in various ways. Again, you could be standing on the street preaching. You can be bold sitting on the couch with your son or your daughter talking about the gospel. And again, as I pointed out, when you're talking about the people who came before you and they're doing work and other people have done the heavy lifting for you, as far as I can tell, the bulk of that work down through history is just parents and families. That's who's doing it. So do not think you have to be out there, superstar, Mike Winger. You don't have to be like that. Focus on, my goodness, can you imagine if Christians just put all their attention on raising godly kids with godly families. That's instantly life-changing, instantly world-changing. And so, if we've been given everything we could possibly need, and we see how God has been involved in this every single step of the way, down to our time, and we look at everything he has given us right now, I have to say it's easy to look around and get depressed and say, oh, this is terribly wrong, that's terribly wrong, oh, we're so doomed. I look around and going, we have everything we need right now, and I believe that if Christians do what we're supposed to do, we are going to see more people come to Christ in our lifetimes than all generations before us.